In recent updates from the front lines of the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia, there are indications of significant shifts in the situation around Bakhmut. The Russian brigade, reportedly led by Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner private army, appears to have retreated from its positions in Bakhmut, which was the primary target of Moscow's winter offensive and witnessed intense ground combat, described as the bloodiest in Europe since World War II. According to Colonel General Oleksandr Syrsky, the head of Ukraine's ground forces, Russian units in some parts of Bakhmut have pulled back by up to 2 kilometers (1.2 miles) due to counterattacks. However, specific details regarding these developments are currently unavailable, and Reuters has been unable to independently verify the situation on the ground. The Wagner units have led a prolonged Russian assault on the eastern city, resulting in heavy losses, but Ukrainian forces assert that the offensive is now faltering. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, speaking on a Bosnian Serb television channel, acknowledged the ongoing military operation but emphasized that Russia is not waging a full-scale war. Peskov stated that Russia had significantly weakened the Ukrainian military machine, citing missile strikes as evidence. He expressed confidence in the eventual capture and control of Bakhmut but did not directly address reports of the 72nd Separate Motor Rifle Brigade's alleged withdrawal from the southwestern outskirts of the city. In response to Peskov's remarks, the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade of Ukraine officially confirmed the flight of Russia's 72nd Independent Motorized Rifle Brigade from near Bakhmut and claimed that 500 Russian corpses were left behind. The Ukrainian brigade accused Russia of launching a limited offensive, alleging that its troops had made gains of 170 meters (530 feet), while Ukrainian forces were confined to an area of 2.25 square kilometers, just under a square mile, and facing pressure in western districts characterized by high-rise apartments. Yevgeny Prigozhin, who heads the Wagner private army, voiced concerns about an anticipated Ukrainian counter-offensive to retake the occupied territories. He reported that the Russian troops had retreated, highlighting the loss of 3 square kilometers and approximately 500 men. Prigozhin also criticized the inadequate supply of artillery shells to his forces. Ukrainian military analyst Roman Svitin characterized the recent developments near Bakhmut as the beginning of a counter-offensive. He highlighted that Ukraine initiated the offensive about a week ago, marking a significant turning point in the conflict. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar took to Telegram to state that pro-Kiev units had not lost any positions in Bakhmut on Wednesday, indicating a successful defense against the Russian incursion. Meanwhile, in a video address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky mentioned the flight of Russia's 72nd Independent Motorized Rifle Brigade from the vicinity of Bakhmut, acknowledging the report by the 3rd Brigade. In Brussels, Admiral Rob Bauer, chair of NATO's military committee, assessed the evolving dynamics of the conflict. He predicted an increasingly asymmetric battle between large numbers of poorly trained Russian troops equipped with outdated weaponry and a smaller Ukrainian force armed with superior Western weapons and training. Bauer noted that Russia had deployed 54 tanks, a model designed in the years following World War II. In a significant development, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland announced the authorization of the first transfer of forfeited Russian assets for use in Ukraine, signaling continued support for Ukraine's defense efforts. The situation in Bakhmut remains fluid, with both sides claiming gains and losses. As the conflict unfolds, the battle for control over this strategic city is intensifying, shaping the trajectory of the wider conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Russia is experiencing the most striking loss of prestige in its history with the Ukraine war. The loss of prestige and Vladimir Putin's authority and the stalemate of the Russian army brings with it some problems. Putin's shaken authority paves the way for the Russian army and paramilitary groups to come to the fore with riots and threats. The biggest impasse of the Russian army is that it has a cosmopolitan structure. Wagner paramilitary group and Kadyrov soldiers formed this cosmopolitan structure. This situation causes ruptures and threats within the Russian army. There had been various disagreements between Kadyrov and the Russian generals in the past days. There are also many disagreements between the Wagner PMC boss, Prigozhin, and the Russian generals and the Kremlin administration. After the Wagner Group's recent success on the Ukrainian Eastern Front, Prigozhin took a more courageous stance towards the Russian generals and the Kremlin administration. However, the Wagner Group achieved partial success on the Eastern Front at a heavy price. Prigozhin lost more than 30,000 soldiers and depleted his ammunition stocks. This troublesome situation brought the Wagner Group and the Moscow administration face to face. The head of the Wagner mercenary group posted a scorching video in which he scolded senior military leaders after publishing the video. Yevgeny Prigozhin issued an ultimatum threatening to withdraw his fighters from Bakhmut next week over the lack of ammunition. In the video posted on social media, Prigozhin is seen walking among the dead bodies of soldiers he claims are Wagner warriors killed in the battle for the city of Bakhmut. The Wagner chief blamed Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, and the chief of military general staff, General Valery Gerasimov, for the deaths of the soldiers. Prigozhin said these are the Wagner men who died. Blood is still fresh. They came here voluntarily and are dying so you can get fat in your mahogany offices. Mr. Prigozhin's final comments came as Bakhmut continued to defend its western pocket and the Kiev forces were preparing to launch a counterattack. Mr. Prigozhin said that the day after Russia's Victory Day holiday, his forces will leave Bakhmut to lick their wounds. Prigozhin stated that due to the lack of ammunition, Wagner Group will hand over its positions in Bakhmut to the units of the Russian Defense Ministry next week. Prigozhin said, "I am withdrawing Wagner units from Bakhmut because in the absence of ammunition they are doomed to a meaningless death." In addition, the Wagner leader stated that they plan to completely take Bakhmut on May 9th, Victory Day. However, Prigozhin claimed that military bureaucrats who saw this stopped all ammunition deliveries as of May 1st. The Wagner chief, on the other hand, has long been openly critical of the Russian military leadership, with some analysts tying tensions to competition in favor of President Vladimir Putin. Mr. Prigozhin never raised a finger directly at Mr. Putin about Russia's failures in the war. In February, Mr. Prigozhin accused Mr. Shoigu and General Gerasimov of treason, claiming that they had left Wagner without ammunition. The disagreement soon subsided, however. Then the mercenary leader said his soldiers now had the ammunition they needed in the closed world of the Russian military. There was no way of knowing if Wagner had taken the ammo or if the Kremlin had told him to keep his mouth shut. In an interview with a Russian military blogger last week, Mr. Prigozhin once again claimed that his troops were running low on ammunition and stated that he would make a decision to continue deploying troops in Bakhmut if he did not receive ammunition. Government spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that the Kremlin had seen Mr. Prigozhin's statements. However, Peskov stated that he would not comment on them. Mr. Prigozhin's last words were added to speculation about weapons stockpiles as Russia enters its 15th month of war in Ukraine. This week, Mr. Shoigu called for faster weapons production. However, a spokesperson for the Ukrainian military stressed that Mr. Prigozhin's comments should be treated with suspicion. Spokesman Sergei Sharavati said Wagnerians will not be allowed to leave the city because Yevgeny Prigozhin is not deciding anything here. Sergei Sharavati reported to the Ukrainian media that Wagner was pretending to be a hot famine. Mr. Sharavati said the problem for Wagner was not a lack of ammunition, but a lack of people to fight. Referring to Sharavati Wagner, she stated that the word death has become synonymous with them. In another development, after the Wagner leader's statements that fell like a bomb on the agenda, another statement came from the Chechen leader, Kadyrov. Kadyrov wrote that Chechen troops fought alongside the Wagner troops in the most difficult areas of Ukraine. Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov said in a statement on his Telegram channel that if the Wagner group withdraws from the Ukrainian city, he will send troops to fight in Bakhmut. In his statement, Ramzan Kadyrov complained about the unpleasantness between Prigozhin and Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov. Kadyrov asked the Russian authorities to respond to Prigozhin's accusations that Wagner was not supplied with sufficient ammunition. The Chechen leader then talked about how Chechen troops fighting in Mariupol, Ukraine once faced similar weapons problems. Ramzan Kadyrov said that he personally called Moscow and talked to the commanders. A month later, Kadyrov stated that the problem was solved, stating that his units did not make video recordings, which did not give the enemy a pleasant opportunity to inform. The Chechen leader then scolded Prigozhin for showing the lost Wagner soldiers in his video. It seems that the cracks in the Russian army are increasing day by day. Disclosures raise tensions. It's a matter of curiosity how the Russian leader will react to the official withdrawal of Wagner boss from Bakhmut. We will wait and see what will happen in the triangle of Putin, Prigozhin and Kadyrov. So how can Ukraine defeat Russia when the Russian army is shaken by threats? Besides the impending Ukrainian counter-offensive, the Russian army has to deal with Ukrainian attacks behind its lines. Russian forces are trying to cope with the nightmare of Ukrainian attacks on logistics nodes. 3 Russian oil refineries and fuel depots have been attacked and extensively damaged in the past days. Russian logistics nodes were located in and around the Crimean Peninsula, which is the likely target of the upcoming Ukrainian counter-offensive. 2 of the attacks involved Ukrainian suicide drones. In its latest wartime forecast, UK military intelligence stated that the disruption to the fuel storage and distribution network will force Russia to make adjustments to reduce targeting in its military refueling operations. Losing ground due to Ukraine's counterattack in the autumn, Russian forces approached the supply lines. Overall, this is a good thing because it takes less time to reach frontline units with fuel and ammo. But Ukraine's long-range fires such as the M142 high-motion artillery rocket system and the M270 multiple-launch rocket system are preventing the Russians from getting their logistics points closer to the front lines. So the Russian advantage of being closer to the supply line is somewhat negated. The logistics of the Russian forces on the front lines will be difficult, and this is exactly the goal of the Ukrainian forces. By attacking logistics points, the Ukrainians are forcing Russian forces to further push back key logistics functions such as fuel depots and ammunition depots. However, this makes it difficult for the Russian troops at the front to resupply. Indeed, the Russian army is a force that relies heavily on human labor. For example, Russians do not use cranes or forklifts to load or unload their ammunition. Instead, they do it by hand. This takes time and effort and makes it difficult to resupply units on the front. As a result, attacks targeting Russia's important supply lines will enable Ukraine to step forward in the war. There is a lot of news from the Luhansk front when it comes to the front line to the north of Svardov. The fighting inside Kazivka continues. Today, Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces once again repelled Russian assaults near Novoselivka. As you remember, the Russians recently lost critical ground due to the recent Ukrainian counterattacks. So in order to not allow the Ukrainians to develop their success further, they also started assaulting still Makivka. The latest report suggests that they are launching one attack after another, which indeed fixes Ukrainian forces and does not allow them to change the composition of troops necessary to launch an offensive towards Kazivka. Near the Slivka group, the Ukrainians finally established control over Yagodny. This is an extremely important development because there are no big fortifications behind the Slivka group. This is the area where we will likely see the biggest movements of the front line because with the biggest settlements on the current line coming under Ukrainian control, the Russians have a really hard time holding their defense in Orlansky and they have a hard time defending Volodymyrivka. As you can see from the geography, the next major defense line goes along the Kabilka River. So when the front line shifts eastward, the Ukrainians will have direct access to Svardov. the Ukrainians will also undermine Russian defense in the northern part. In fact, Russian sources are already reporting about the Ukrainian preparation for offensive actions near the village Jenka. If you still remember, last month the Russians conducted a limited offensive operation here and unsuccessfully tried to push the Ukrainians to the other side of the river. Right now, everything returned to the status quo, and judging by the increased concentration of troops, the Ukrainians might be preparing to breach Russian defense here. This would be logical because the latest Australian reports also suggest that the Ukrainians got deep behind Pershot-Ravensk, which creates a salient. The grinding process has been going on for a long time, so right now Russian defense in this region is undermined. And if the weather is favorable, we may see a lot of changes here in the coming month. When it comes to the front line, to the south of Svatov, the most intense fights are taking place around Kolmynar. Today, Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces repelled assaults near Plashenka and Chervona Popovka. The information regarding Plashenka is unclear. Some reports say that the Ukrainians managed to push the Russians out, while others claim that the Russians are still in control. In any case, judging by the reports, the fights have been moving further and further from Makiivka, so it is highly likely that the Russians lost the upper hand and desperately tried to defend this crucial position. Blashenko is a small village located on the local heights which secures the flank of the Russians in Osvobozdeny. The moment the Russians lose Plashenka, their positions above will be compromised and they will eventually need to step back, opening access to Svatava from the south as well. Overall, despite very slow progress, the Ukrainians are still getting closer to Svatov. The loss of key defense positions to the north of Svatov is leading to a lot of changes which will force the Russians to devote a disproportionate amount of resources to stabilize the situation, which will open a window of opportunity for the Ukrainians in the south. If the Ukrainians in the south manage to exploit this opportunity and establish control over Plashenka, then they will gain an absolute tactical advantage in that region, and it will only be a question of time until the Romanian-Russian defenses along the Yarabes River are undermined and breached. Once Varduva gets in the range of Ukrainian short-range artillery, the losses of Russian men and equipment will spike tremendously. And having seen the history, it is not unlikely that the Russians opt to abandon the city rather than concentrate their efforts in a particular region and suffer through the strikes.